Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today. I just wanted to talk very quickly about the ergonomics and the rider fit of the Honda GB350. Now obviously this is going to be based on my size and height and leg length and everything like that, which is, for reference, 180 centimeters and a 32-inch inseam. So I'm a little bit longer on the legs and a little bit shorter in the torso. Keep that in mind when we're talking about the Honda GB350. First off, let's jump on the bike and take a quick look at the seating position. Because I'm on the longer leg side, I will say me getting both feet down flat is not a terrible surprise, and throwing a leg over the back of the bike is quite easy for me. If you're a much shorter rider, that might not be the case quite so much. So I gotta be honest, I did guess the seat height on this bike was 800 mils, and it is not the narrowest bike that I've ever jumped on with that kind of seat height, but it is quite manageable indeed. And I don't think the shorter riders are, generally speaking, gonna have a huge problem with this bike. It is not the shortest or the narrowest in the entire class, but there's not much in it, realistically speaking. So I think getting a foot down should be, for most riders, doable, even if it's the 1 foot down, which obviously, because this is kind of the more classically inspired bike, it does seem to carry its weight a little bit lower, not as low as a cruiser, but more similar to that. And that works to the bike's benefit. It's not as tall overall, all the weight is lower. And while I think it's 181 kilos, I really did not feel that 181 kilos once I was moving. Pushing it around in gravel like this, you will feel the weight, but in all the real use, you're not gonna notice this bike is heavy or is 180 kilos. And if anything, it's gonna be the opposite. You're gonna feel like it is a much lighter and more manageable bike because it's just very well balanced. And that is a combination of both the balance front and rear. It is not a bike which feels really orientated towards being front-endy or rear-endy. Some bikes, if they're a bit low on the rear, you can feel kind of like the orientation of the bike is towards the back, or it's more front-endy if you're really engaged. I feel like it is a really nice combination of the two, a really nice balancing point between the two. And that's kind of, I guess you'd say, mirrored in the nice relaxed seating position that you should be able to see here. Nice, very relaxed foot position and foot peg position and foot controls. You've got a pretty, almost maybe a little bit less than 90-degree bend in the legs, keeping in mind I've got longer legs. So it's very much kind of the regular seated position. And then the reach to those bars, the bars are quite wide, but obviously that gives you really good leverage and makes it a nice, fairly relaxed machine. I certainly wasn't kind of getting my elbows up and getting into that kind of extreme, because it's a more casual and a more relaxed bike. And in that regard, total winner. I was really impressed. The vision through the mirrors is exceptional. It is really good. And the vision of that dash, it's nice and easy to read. It does have a gear indicator. It's got a traction control indicator. You can see whether your indicators are on very easily with the indicator light up the top. Just really simple. Everything that I'd expect from the kind of attention to detail that Honda put into their motorcycles. And yeah, from an ergonomic perspective, really nice and impressed. Expanding that a little bit, it does have a slip and assist clutch, so it's got a really nice and light clutch feel, and obviously that extends to the engagement as well. So that is quite nice. You do need to, sometimes you can't like half-ass your gear shifts. You do need to make sure you're doing that properly. But I mean, that should go without saying. But as long as you do that, you'll find engagement of the gearbox really good. And not too hard to get it into neutral either, which is obviously another good thing, particularly if you're a new rider, probably less of a concern for everyone else. Jumping off the bike. So as you can see, getting it onto the side stand, really nice and easy. You've got a grab rail on the back. You do have this kind of fake leather seat. It looks like leather, which is probably the most important feature. And it's kind of a bucket seat, so it's nicely sculpted. It is actually quite a comfortable seat as well, which is always the bigger concern, I would say. And then you've got a little bit of room here for a pillion, and you've got the very kind of generic pillion pegs there on the exhaust hanger and on a hanger on the other side here. So you could possibly lose, maybe not. I was going to say you could possibly take that off and save a bit of weight, but it doesn't look like it. It's all integral to the main foot controls, but I mean, let's be honest, you're probably not going to worry about that. The bike does have a 15-litre fuel tank, so it has a reasonably large fuel tank for this kind of style bike. And I will say, I guess this is somewhat ergonomics related, when you're filling up the tank, you do need to be a little bit careful with how you get the nozzle in there and everything like that, because it takes a little bit of finesse, but you'll work that out in 1 or 2 refills and you'll have that working no problems at all. But I wasn't filling it up to the rim because it just did not seem like the best idea. But again, maybe owners will figure that one out. But yeah, so just as a small extra little detail that I did notice. Talking about the adjustability on this particular bike, it is quite limited. So we're talking about an $8,000 bike, which is very, very good value. That is Australian dollars as well. And there's just preload adjustability on those rear shocks, which if I was owning this bike, I would probably play around with it a little bit and see if I could dial in the rear for my weight a little bit more specifically. But the non-adjustable suspension front and rear certainly worked for me. I really can't complain about either. And I think it's a pretty good system, particularly for the rough roads that I've been testing the bike on today. As far as vibrations, if you really rev the bike, you will find that some vibrations appear. There was very light vibrations through the handlebars if I was holding onto those gears a little bit longer, and if I was really holding on for too long, and certainly not hitting the rev limit or anything like that, but if I was holding those gears for longer than I would generally riding, like trying to have a little bit more of a fang, some small vibes did come through the foot pegs, and those are rubber clad, so there is that kind of to keep in mind, but it wasn't really what I'd consider a big problem, and I was kind of pushing the envelope of how I would generally ride the bike. I think when the vibrations appear in both pegs and bars, it's time to upshift, and there's no tacho, so you're just doing that by feel, and that's no drama whatsoever. There is a very noticeable kind of torque band when you get up into the right part of the rev range if you want the most performance, but generally speaking, you can keep it pretty much anywhere. It's nice and relaxed and forgiving, and even if you're probably a little bit low in the rev range, it'll still pick up the speed eventually, but you'll be able to tell where you are kind of in that. And that's probably starting to fall outside of the ergonomics envelope, so check out my full review if you haven't already to get a bit more insight into the bike overall.
Now, one big thing I actually missed until I recorded the video was this bike is fitted with a center stand, and while as a youngish, I guess middle-aged rider, I've never really looked for this as a feature, there's definitely advantages, and it's a big selling point for some riders. I have a feeling that'll be the older riders who like that kind of traditional feature, but it is there. The other point I forgot to mention was that the large tank is also a good width between the knees. It's not super wide, but it's also not a narrow peanut style or narrow sport style tank. There's no knee pads, but combined with the more forward foot controls, it worked really well for me.
If you got any questions, let me know down below in the comments. As always, stay safe out there. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.